Okay, I tried something really sneaky on Facebook since I posted yesterday in complete desperation of like, is there anybody here at all? Because I would post the past, I don't know, it feels like at least the past 4 months. Anything I post to Facebook, just there's no engagement at all. Like, it doesn't matter what I do. So, given the extensive response yesterday, I absolutely was like, hey, how's everybody doing on Saturday? Made you look at your calendar, right? Uh, no, I'm sorry for being very sneaky, but I honestly wanted to see what would happen if I did a live right after something that got a bunch of engagement, even if that engagement was everybody telling me that it was actually Friday. Uh, this is actually a technique I learned in ghost hunting. When you go into a place and you don't want to be one of those people who just shouts at ghosts, to like, I'm not that guy. But if you want to get a reaction, get some of their story wrong, because there are very few things that will motivate people more than the urge to correct you about something they feel passionate about. So if you are ever someone who's going and doing ghost hunting, and you're not quite sure if there are spirits that are listening to you and you want to get a rise out of them, don't bully them, don't threaten them, don't yell at them and be a douche. Just have a conversation and be like, hey, I heard this about your story. Is it right? And make sure there is at least one detail that is thunderously, provably, demonstrably wrong, and see whether or not anything picks up the correction. It's I have to give props to Resident Undead Paranormal, because that was their whole shtick. I assume they're still doing it, where they will do these sort of flashback scenes and they recreate what was going on from what they learned with their research of the location, and they would always make certain there was at least one detail glaringly wrong, as a way of getting a response, getting a rise out of the thing without being threatening, without being horrible. So that's a little ghost hunting pro tip, and paranormal investigation is tangential to why I am here to talk to you today. So, for folks who aren't into the indie publishing scene and the gaming scene, let me introduce you to the concept of Zine Month or Zine Quest. February is Zine Month. What the fuck is a zine? Okay, so back in the 80s and 90s, there were underground publications, amateur publications by people like myself, predominantly in like the goth and punk, occult and queer communities, all the little marginalized spaces where you couldn't actually get a publisher or a newspaper or a magazine to pick up your stuff because you were a little too out there as far as societal norms back then were concerned. So if you wanted to do a little magazine on tattooing or piercing, which was completely verboten back then, if you wanted to do a magazine about queer rights, if you wanted to have, in my case, just gothic literary poetry, but it was too dark for the Satanic Panic, you made a zine. And a zine was just a little magazine that you produced yourself, usually run off on, a Xerox machine, often hand stapled, hand assembled. And there was this thriving, the amazing, thriving, networked community that spanned countries. It wasn't merely just a couple of states or a little local thing, although the local scenes were often really awesome. But a zine was a specialized amateur publication that was aimed at a very specific niche of interest. They were fantastic and artsy. And if you watched Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, uh, there is one of the Spider-Men who is drawn in the style of 70s punk zines. And he is very much the punk Spider-Man of that whole crew. That style of stuff that almost looks like you clipped it out of the TV guide and random magazines and pasted it together, and it's all kind of like hackneyed, but there's a weird art to it. That is in honor of the zines from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So flash forward to now, zines have gotten a whole renaissance. It's amazingly easy to create and publish your own stuff now, both in digital format as well as physical format. So while we are seeing colleges and other locations create zine museums that are collecting things like what I was doing when I was putting together with literal physical copy paste for my zine Shadow Dance on the floor of my dorm room back in like 91. Uh, there are magazine uh, museums now, and folks who have rediscovered them, there's a whole new generation of folks, are also creating zines because it's the whole point is to do this small, like bite-sized creative thing that is completely indulgent to a topic. Whether it's telling a personal story, whether it's creating a game, whether it's just focusing on a very, very niche corner of short stories or poetry. And February is the month where anybody who is a zine creator or who wants to be a zine creator gets together and creates and shares those zines. And that expanded into Zine Quest, which is usually, back in the day, this was something that you did out of pocket. It was totally a labor of love. This was, before every hobby had to also be a hustle, before everything had to be making money because you absolutely weren't making your rent or your food or your anything. Now, to be fair, we were also basically using, in my case, like I would eat ramen and then also be able to pay off the printing costs for the zine. But Zine Quest is a time where people crowdfund support for their little creations. And I hopped in on that this month and this year for a game. Um, why am I doing games? Because they're fun. Because I've been a role playing gamer since I was 9 or 10. uh, Dungeons and Dragons first, which was really the first game for pretty much everybody in my generational cohort. They've got that right with Stranger Things. Like, it is incredibly nostalgic to see that group of people playing the way that they play. And I would say the only thing that doesn't feel authentic with the Dungeons and Dragons crew on Stranger Things is Will, who we now know is gay. Um, for all of us in the 80s, we all had that one friend who gamed with us who we had some sense. And eventually, like, they probably came out. They almost always played a female character. If they were a boy, they played a female character. If they were a girl, they played a male character. And that gaming was a way of having a safe space to explore those identities, to sort of see themselves in a different light and ask themselves, who do they really want to be? Who do they really want to love? How do they want to look? So anyway, gaming is in my blood. I got into Vampire the Masquerade in the 90s. I ran Vampire the Masquerade live action role playing events at Origins and Gen Con and Concentric and Consanguinity and half a dozen others throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And we're not talking small things, we're talking games that had 150 to 200 players. I wrote the characters. Most of the times they had 2 to 3 page backstories because I am completely insane. Um, and I just like wrote these novels that then came to life in these games. And that is the thing that has always hooked me and kept me coming back to game creation. It's another way to tell stories, and it's a way to collaboratively tell stories. Like, I can create the backdrop and the main characters, and then I put it in the hands of the people who are going to play and watch them take things in directions I could never have dreamed of. Watch these games have multiple different variations and versions. It's a little bit everything everywhere all at once, because you have all these alternate reality versions of the characters and the stories, and that vibrancy, that diversity, the freedom of letting people make something of their own inside the container you've shaped is really like a very powerful type of magic. So I also write horror fiction. Obviously, I do paranormal investigation. A couple years ago, a fellow Clevelander, Anjali Bhamani, who, if you follow Critical Role, you all most certainly know her name if you've watched Ms. Marvel and half a dozen other things. She's been all over the place. She's a lovely human being. She was looking for duet games. This was post 2020 and the lockdowns, where you couldn't really get around a table with like 15 of your friends or 5 of your friends. You certainly couldn't do a LARP with 100 of your friends, but you could maybe play a game with one of the people you lived with or with one person over a Zoom call. A duet game is a 2-player game that is intended to work with the fact that we have very busy schedules, often limited amounts of time to devote to gaming as much as we want to do it, and also to get around what is called in gaming lingo the forever GM, which is there's a person who needs to create that container, who needs to run the stories. The sort of de facto image of that, if you are even tangentially related to the gaming community right now, would be Matthew Mercer of Critical Role, who has for 10 years been the person creating a vast world and all the stories, playing all the extra characters and NPCs, keeping all of that straight in his head, preparing this vast, epic story for his friends to play in. And that is a tremendous amount of work. And not everybody has the time or the energy or just honestly the spoons to do that week in and week out. So one of the things that I like about duet games and also solo games is you don't need a GM. You don't need a person to create it for you because the game is already that creation. You, as the person who's writing it, set things up in such a clear way that people can just jump in and have an hour, 90 minutes of their time and just immerse in the actual fun of playing a role, which is the whole lure of role playing. So, flash forward to Zine Quest 2025 this February. It's my wife is like. If you have seen me, I apologize if it's been annoyingly, posting a Kickstarter link. It is for a game called Soul to Keep. Soul to Keep. I have many cards from Soul to Keep. Soul to Keep is a duet game that I started working in answer to Anjali Bhamani's request for duet games. Obviously, it wasn't ready for the time that she was actually looking for it. This has been in development. The thing about making games is you have to write them, go back and like play test them, have other people play test them, do a whole lot of back and forth to make sure that all of the mechanics are balanced. Hire people to do art, like Enoch Duncan, who has done the art here. This is my favorite one. Soul to Keep is on Kickstarter. It is a pricey Kickstarter because what I am crowdfunding is a physical edition in both a basic and a deluxe of the game. That includes the printed booklet. It includes a bunch of ephemera that help give you a setting and inspire the background of this creepy haunted house where the main action of this duet game plays out. It helps me pay off the artist who did all of the work for this and also pay off the bill for having cards printed because there are 11 location cards, each with a pretty intense thing. And is it a tabletop RPG? Yes, that is what it is. It is a duet tabletop RPG. There will be a PDF version, so digital version that will be available if we fund. And then in addition, I have a limited number of physical versions that people can purchase by way of supporting the Kickstarter. So the way Kickstarter works is it's all or nothing. I have created tiers there that are like, here are 66 copies that will be produced of the deluxe version. And if that's what you want, sign up for it because those will never exist again. And if you only have 20 bucks to spare, pop in on the PDF level, you will get a digital version and that will go anywhere in the world. And that $20 will go to also funding the not insignificant cost of making a physical version of this game. There's a lot of moving parts, editing and layout and art, never mind the actual physical production of cards, of the physical book, of the packaging, all the ephemera that goes with it, and mailing stuff out and handling it, and also paying the wonderful people who have helped me put the Kickstarter together on the back end. Because some of you might remember I was involved in a Kickstarter before a couple of years ago, which you probably have heard nothing about since. Neither have I. Uh, all that money, that didn't go to me. It's who knows where it went. I have not seen it. I haven't seen anything from that Kickstarter. We shall not name it because that wasn't a very good experience. And it's why I'm doing this one by myself with a couple of people who are giving me advice. Shout out to Rue and Rena, who have been incredibly helpful on the back end to like cheerlead me through the process, because putting together a Kickstarter is not fun. And it is very, very high stress and very high risk. But in this case, I know where the money's going. I crunched the numbers. I wish I could make it like a lower number, but like when I started to list it, like everything, I was like, oh well.
Talk some about like you're working with so many amazing artists behind the scenes. Like that's most of.
Well, okay. So, I mean, that gets into the stretch goal. So if you heard my wife off thing, yeah, I could probably mention a couple of people.
Yeah, because they're awesome.
So here's the thing. The first step is make that base Kickstarter number, which is achievable just by selling all of the copies of the physical copies that are likely to be put together. There are very limited numbers. As a tier that I don't expect anybody to take me up on, but just in case you do, because let's face it, everybody's scrambling for money right now. Kind of the world's a lot right now. I did add in a tier that is a nod to folks who follow me as a paranormal investigator. It is our Dark Angel tier, inspired by angel investors. And that one is $1,000. That is totally you are basically investing in making this thing be a real thing, but you get a private 30-minute conversation with me. Call you up via Zoom and we will talk hauntings. That is probably that is the highest thing. There's only 6. I'd initially considered 13 because it's a number that I really like. And then I sat down and was like, if I actually get 13 people who want this, I don't know that I can. I'm an introvert. I don't know if I can do 13 conversations like that, but 6, I think I can fit in if that is something that actually goes. Understand you would be funding this lovely fun thing for me. Okay.
And there are so many other tiers. I feel like once you've talked about that tier, like
okay. So I mean, there's one thing with Kickstarter, and this is usually what I do with Kickstarter. I don't know if you're like me. I will see somebody's project and I'm like, that looks like a lot of fun. I don't necessarily need another game. I'm just going to put in $10 and just because I want to back it. So Kickstarter allows for an option to just be like, have some money just because I think this is cool. You don't have any requirement to keep up on it, to have anything mailed to you. You don't have to worry about that, which frankly is a tier that I find really helpful. I like supporting folks, and $5, $10. Actually, yesterday I did that. I went down on all of the lists of people who have been helping to. We've been doing a zine swap on Blue Sky with different Zine Quest things. So they have a Kickstarter, I have a Kickstarter. I boost theirs, they boost mine. I went down the list and was like, have $10, have $10, have $10, have $10, just because I could. And it's kind of fun to do so. Set myself a limit so it wouldn't just be break the bank. So the first thing after that is $20 gets you a PDF. $40 gets you the basic physical version of the game, which is the physical printed thing.
Printed, what is thing?
The rule book. The rule book that tells you everything about how the game is played, how you put the game together. Now, deluxe versions have a room track, these cards, but the basic rule book, as a gamer, one of the lures with Dungeons and Dragons as a kid, I didn't have a lot of money. Like, we were the family where if you traded presents, they were probably things that you made, handmade. And so I wanted to bake into the game, in the rule book, the option of, you don't need to have miniatures and you don't need to have a map. You don't need to have all these extra add-ons or anything. You can literally just get a scrap of paper and make your room track. You can make the stuff yourself. One of the play testers, Bob Freeman, and his son Connor went like whole hog on that, and actually had made this like full elaborate layout on graph paper of like the whole interior of the house as they envisioned it, and it was wonderful. And I will say that the biggest stretch goal that is not currently mentioned is, if we pass a certain point, it will fund an alternate version of this game that Bob and Connor put together with their vision of the house.
Cool.
and Bob, you can find Bob's work on occultdetective.com. He writes occult detective fiction, also does a bunch of stuff of paranormal investigation in the haunted hinterlands of Indiana. A fun fellow, and fun friend, who also traipses that line of genuine paranormal investigation, genuine knowledge of the occult, but also knows that there's value in having spaces that you play in with the ideas that you also like work in, that there's a certain magic in moving between both spaces. Let me see. Other tiers give you access to a more deluxe set, where it's in a found footage envelope, like you belong to a paranormal research society that has done research on this creepy old house. Where, actually, that's a good point. I have not told you the concept of the game.
Oh my gosh. We've been thinking about this way too long. Oh no.
I'm excited, and this is what happens. So, why is it called Soul to Keep? The tagline is, one body, two souls, winner takes all. You have a paranormal investigator, and you have a tragic child ghost in a creepy old house. The investigator has gone into the house all by themselves. What led them there and why is up to you, the creator of that character. If you happen to be playing the game, you involve yourself in creating their backstory and their motivations. But the things that we know for sure that are set within the context of the game is, the investigator has come in and found their way to the nursery. And in coming up to the nursery in this decrepit old house, they played with something, or they called the name out, or they picked up the wrong teddy bear, or they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and this tragic child ghost has possessed them. Now, there is a round zero before the actual like meat of the game begins, where you do like a little bit of introduction of, if you are the paranormal investigator, what do you look like? What gear did you come in with? How are you interacting with the space? Part of that is also describing some of the space, because although we have images like this, one of the appeals of a role-playing game is you are in it. You get to create and co-create it, you and the other person you're playing with. The ghost also, how do you manifest? What kind of personality do you have? Do you have, I just want to play a game, kind of creepy voices? Or are you just genuinely a sad little kid who just wants a friend? You could be my friend, right? We could play forever. I just need you to come down with me to the well where maybe my body is, and it's okay because my friends maybe never leave, but we'll be friends forever. We can always play. So round zero is the introductory round. You get to learn about one another. Don't give too much away, but get a sense of what's personality like, what's appearance like, what is this setting like, how do you interact with one another, what does it feel like in that moment when the possession takes place. Because after round zero, you are two people in the same body fighting to get that body to go in completely opposite directions. If you are the investigator, you want to get the fuck out. Out of the house. So down the long, creepy hallway, down the stairs, past the parlor to the front door and onto the porch to just get out of the aura of this space, because you have a keen instinctive knowledge that if you can get away from the house, you are far enough away from the ghost's influence, you will escape with your life intact. Go you. The ghost, on the other hand, wants to pull you further into the house. They are a tragic child. How they died, and how they ended up where they are at in the house is up to the person who's created that character, but there are a few things that are true. They're a child, so somewhere between toddler and teen. They died in the house under some circumstance. Their bones are still, their remains are still in the house, specifically at the bottom of a well in the basement. Much older houses tended to have the well inside the house because it was a nice, safe way to control your well. Not always a safe way to keep your kids. There was usually a lid on it. But anyway, so there's a well in the basement. Dear Liza, there's a well in the basement.
Dear Liza, oh well.
And at the bottom, a child. Something about that well is magic, maybe? The ghost, this isn't the first person the ghost has interacted with. It's not the first person they've possessed, but their friends always get away. So the only way to know for sure that their friend will stay with them forever and they won't be lonely anymore is to get them down to the bottom of the well with them. And yes, this means that the investigator will die. But from the ghost's perspective, now they're just like them, and now they will be friends forever. One of the reasons that I want this potentially creepy dynamic is, possession is a hot button issue and also a thrilling issue that we explore in all aspects of paranormal investigation as well as paranormal fiction. But usually it's framed as demonic. It's always demonic. It's demonic so often I am very done with it being demonic. It's honestly not a demon as often as anybody thinks it is. And demonic possession is too easy. Like, it's just, here is a de facto evil, malevolent, awful thing. It's taken you over. Brar, it's going to ruin you. I want the frankly more realistic struggle of, this is a human ghost who has wants and needs and is even sympathetic. Like, you can relate to the loneliness. And the reason I picked a child is children will do things without realizing that they're evil. Sometimes they do terrible things because it's what they want. They don't understand any better. So the child ghost just knows that they're lonely and they want a companion. And there's a lot to explore in the spaces between that, where here is something doing terrible things, a terrifying force that really just wants a friend. And that psychodrama of moving back and forth, trying to escape the true death of loneliness, that is the crux of the game. How this game is a GM-less game, again, gaming lingo, it doesn't have a person who is controlling or telling you what happens round by round. It's organized into rounds. And you actually play basically a game of war. You have a deck of cards, just regular cards you get lying around your house. Split them in half. All the black cards in one spot, all the red cards in another spot. Take the joker out. Don't need it. One of you gets the red deck. One of you gets the black deck. Shuffle, 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 shuffle. And then at the top of each round, you just flip over your top card. Whoever has the high card is the person who gets control of the body. Whoever has the low card, it becomes what's known as the passenger. They can't move the body. They don't have physical control, but that doesn't mean that they're passive. The passenger has passenger powers. Since they're living in your head, they can trigger memories. They can talk to you. They can make you see things and change your perception of the space around you. Each character, the investigator and the ghost, have different passenger powers that they can trigger if they are the passenger that round. One power, one effectively scene of bringing forward backstory, telling like where the emotional state of everybody is, changing the perception of the location so that the investigator who is going in this direction isn't entirely sure that that's where they need to go. Uh, the person who's driving the body can move that body one room per round. And you've got that room track of, can you get all the way out to your winning location outside if you're the investigator, down to the well if you're the ghost. And of course, there's this push pull because next round, if the ghost has control, they just move you right back to the room you were in before. Now, because that in playtesting can get tedious if all you're doing is focusing on moving back and forth. There is the option, and this is where the role playing comes in, to tap out, to give up. Did the other person role play well enough when they were triggering passenger powers that you actually feel for them? As the ghost, were you convinced that, you know, a forever friend is not worth the cost to this person, that they have so many things to live for, that like they have a reason to exist as well, as much of a right to exist as you do, so you should let them go? Or do you really feel like maybe you should just go hang out with this kid forever and have a very different type of existence, haunting this house together? And yes, by saying forever, does that mean the investigator dies if the child ghost wins? The investigator joins the child ghost and becomes a ghost. So is it even about winning? Which is really kind of the question for role-playing games. Like, is it about winning? I made the mechanics so that if you are very new to role play, there's enough of a structure that you could almost approach this like a board game, and hopefully along the way, like really start to feel the pull of the characters. But with role-playing games, winning isn't exactly the point. This is a role-playing game that has win conditions, and you can lean on that for structure if you feel the need for that structure, and if you are uncertain about how to make a role-playing game end. But within the framework of that structure, within the vessel created by it, the real magic of role play is you sink into these characters and you have conversations as them. You interact with one another, and the passenger powers in particular are designed to allow you to trigger each other's stories and get deeper and deeper and reveal more of who you are and why it's important, and what does the world feel like in this moment as you are struggling for your very existence, as you are struggling for some hope in the darkness of an afterlife that has been so far quite bleak. It is a very dark game. I mean, I'm not going to lie. There've been a couple of people who are like, nope, I will. This is too much for me. I I have a distinction of a couple of times when I've had some of my fiction blurbed where you're supposed to contact, various people that you know. And I've reached out to like some pretty dark horror writers, and they're just like, no, this is too dark for me. I can't. And I'm like, really? I'm too dark for you? Okay. But that said, it comes with some content warnings, particularly like if suicide is a big bad for you, it is implicit that there is going to be death if the investigator ends. If child peril and child death is a deal breaker for you, I mean, we start the game, there is a child who has died on this property. How? By what means? Whether it was accidental or something worse, that is very much up to the people who are crafting the story within the structure. But you need to know that that's a topic going in. Death, murder, abuse might be a part of it, which actually brings us to safety tools, which take up like the last half of the rule book. Safety tools are something that have become essential in role play, because especially with horror role play, we can go to incredibly dark places, but not all of us might be in a good headspace to go there. If you have a group that you game with or a person you game with and you are very comfortable with, like you each know one another's boundaries, you know what's too much, you know when people are getting overwhelmed, you know the tells, you can trust that person to like really immerse in something like this, and you don't have to have a long discussion about the guardrails going in. But safety tools are there for, maybe this is someone you've never gamed with before. Maybe it's someone that you have gamed with, but not a game like this. And you need to have a discussion about what topics are a no-go. If we're still going to play this game, what type of backstory do we not want to hear about? And if we are getting overwhelmed, if it is too much, make sure that there is a clear set of rules in place to just be like, nope, nope, nope. This scene is just stop. And there are better people than me who have created a whole host of safety tools for role play. They're all listed, briefly give an overview, as well as links to their sites, from the X card to the rewind sort of thing. Like, there's a lot of very clever ways to make intense gaming experiences safe for everybody, especially in a time when we exist where everything sort of feels like it's really eroding our emotional capacity, where there's just, everything's very overwhelming. Some people love horror fiction because it is cathartic, because it is horrible, because terrible things happen, but because those terrible things happen within a framework where there's usually clear good and evil, there's a clear way to battle it, not like the regular world. And sometimes even when there isn't, in the course of horror fiction, having this intense and awful constrained experience lets you basically have a good cry about it, but instead of a good cry, it's a good terror, and that's a release. Anyway, so I'm gonna take more water.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions here. Do you want to take some?
Yeah, I'd love to hear some questions.
Yeah, here we go. Here's one that I haven't thought of before.
My wife Anita isn't a suitable player for me to duel with. Any mechanism for playing with others via the web? Absolutely. One of the reasons that I wrote the game that I wrote, the way I wrote it, was it doesn't have to only be on a physical tabletop. And especially if you want to get into like found footage vibes, or almost like the vibe of you as the investigator are streaming this. You could work the streaming to someone else where you are in a Zoom call with the ghost, but as the investigator, you're talking to your audience. You're talking to the people who, you're creating found footage as this thing happens. It's really, I think one of the things that really appeals to me, especially with gaming post 2020, there were already a fair number of platforms that were supporting digital and virtual game tables and whatnot. Roll20, a couple of others like that. I mean, you can play D&D through the internet using D&D Beyond. And this one is a simple enough game that as long as you can talk to the person, it doesn't even have to be video chat. You can just have a call. And as long as both of you have access to the rules, which honestly, if you've got a digital version of it, just shoot the PDF over to your friend, let your friend look at it. I don't care.
And support creators by backing their Kickstarter.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice. It would be nice.
Yeah.
But like the Kickstarter is really about like, I want to get a physical version of it, because again, like the art that Enoch did, and all the other little bits, like I've got so many creepy black and white photos for people to find in these settings. The first setting is a one of the stretch goals, Bleakwood Manor, to give you basically a world in which to create. So yes, it is something that you can play at a distance, and adapt to your circumstance. Because, I haven't played this game with my wife because, yeah, Illyria's not really necessarily into like really dark horror. I think they would make a fantastic creepy child ghost, though.
Heck yeah. Okay. Here comes another question.
Yeah, another question. Do I still do book signings? I still sign books. I do not do things in person. There's a number of reasons, but long COVID has severely put a damper on my ability to travel or be in person. It's also why you won't see me on much of any shows unless I've Skyped in or do like a Zoom reading. So you'll see me on like Katrina Weidman's Travel the Dead because she is a doll and will work with me to do remote viewing. So often you'll see this backdrop when I'm doing readings anyway, just hanging out in what used to be my dining room. This is also, this is like my gaming hoard. If I were a dragon, these are all of the gaming books. You can see a lot of Vampire the Masquerade. You can see a lot of Dungeons and Dragons 5 edition. And you don't necessarily see over here, but you can see some Forgotten Realms, some 2E, some 2.5E, some Spelljammer,
Skeletons.
as well as a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, by far and large, the library of gaming stuff is mostly World of Darkness books, plus a bunch of graphic novels and all. This is all the fun stuff. This is in fact not the occult section of the library. That's elsewhere. So if you want books of mine that are signed, just pick them up off my website and make sure if you want it signed to a specific name, there's a little like note you can leave me. Please do. There's so many people who are like, they want a signed book and then there's no name and we don't know what name to sign it to. So I sign it to you, but I don't put a name because I don't want the wrong name. But if you want a signed book from me, just pop over onto michellebelanger.com. I apologize because there's a lot of stuff in that store. A lot. Look for books. Scroll through the 40 or so things that are up there. I think it's more now. And pick what you want. We will ship it to you. The one thing is currently we have overseas shipping paused as we're trying to like figure out what's going on post January 20th. There's a lot going on in the US. I don't know if you've paid attention to the news, but some of it has had some like yo-yoing questions about shipping and tariffs and whatnot. So shipping within the US, still good. Brief pause. We will come back to shipping overseas. For now, we just didn't want things to get lost in translation with everything that's going on. But simple answer. You want a signed book, buy it from my site. Let me know what your name is. I will sign it to you. And there's almost always like a little phrase or thing or like cheerleady thing that I add to the book. Also, it's the best way to get some fun stickers. Do I still have the Psychic Vampire Codex there? Yes, I do. I also have like there's a version of it where I scanned the handwritten 1994 first version of the Vampire Codex, and that is on there as well as the current Vampire Codex. Pretty much everything is on there. There's PDF versions as well if you just want a book and are on a budget and don't want to fuss with shipping.
Okay. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm having some weird like connection issues.
Well,
so I'm hoping that's just affecting my computer, which is getting up there in years.
Well, who knows? I mean, let's see. Us and our house and weird things when I talk about ghosts.
Truth. And we're okay, great. We're moving again.
I'll just keep this to hand.
That sounds like a good plan.
That's a thing.
Yeah, you've been talking about ghosts, and now the technology's acting funny.
That's the thing. Okay, actually, I'm gonna tell you all a fun story about that weird space between role playing and actual ghost stuff. So, I used to run a Vampire the Masquerade Chronicle in the 90s and early 2000s. It was called Providence in Providencia. It was set in 1920s Providence, Rhode Island, Lovecraft country, with little aspects of Lovecraft fiction in there as well. At one of the smaller group games, so it was a live action game, we had probably 60 people. Since it is set in the 1920s, there was a spiritualist group. I was a big believer in it. Was the base game was Vampire the Masquerade, so most of the characters were vampires. But we also had Garou, werewolves. We also had wraiths. We also had regular humans who I wrote homebrew rules for so that they could hold their own. People who had psychic abilities, people who practiced magic, people who had just inborn family traditions that allowed them to competitively hold their own against this weird world of darkness where vampires and werewolves and ghosts and everything all abounded. So, in keeping with that, we had someone who was a spiritualist medium in the course of the game. So, this is the person's character, and he had his little group where he would do seances. And in the course of the game, he wanted to run a seance. And I was like, oh, I got a Ouija board. And I know everybody's like, ah, but it's me. I've got a Ouija board. I know how to use a Ouija board. I know how to like make sure that it's a safe experience for people. I've been doing this since I was 12. It's okay. So I wanted to see, in the spirit of the Philip experiment, which is brief history. Philip experiment was, they invented a ghost. This wasn't a ghost who existed. They made sure to bake in elements that were fictional to see whether or not they could still contact basically an egregore, a constructed spirit. I met Al Peacock, who is one of the foundational members of the Canadian society that did the Philip experiment. Got to hear all sorts of fun stories about it. They did table tipping. They had all kinds of astounding reactions with this. As a very tiny person, I got to watch them summon Philip on one of the television talk shows. I think it was That's Incredible. They did several shows where they demonstrated what was going on with Philip. So, like, again, I've been into this shit since I was a kiddo. So we've got our little Providence game. The spirit medium in character sits down at a table and goes to have a conversation with a ghost who also is a character. Like, he is literally contacting the ghost of Charles DeRose, who was one of the Toreador elders, one of the vampire elders who had died, and nobody quite knew who killed him and what was going on. So the whole idea was, let's contact this deceased character in the course of this game. Everybody's in character. They're talking to a spirit who is also a character to get details about that character's death in the game. Okay, everything's constructed, except there are now people sitting around a table using a Ouija board to communicate with this spirit. And friends, I'm of course, I'm standing there as the GM, making sure that if they ask questions and they need the spirit to talk, I can tell them some of the story of what was going on, because this is great role play. They are doing everything right to try to solve this mystery. But I'm also, as a practitioner, making sure that nothing goes weird and sideways with the Ouija board, because we happen to also be doing this in a metaphysical shop. We're actually in the room where a local psychic would do her tarot readings. She asked me never to do this again in her room. By the way, she wasn't very keen on, like, there was just a weird feel afterwards. But anyway, what was amazing with this is I, as the storyteller, did not have to jump in with the answers, because by gosh and by golly, it started to work as you would expect a Ouija board to work. Not a single person sitting at that table in character knew what had happened to the character ghosts they were talking to. They did not have these details. They had no access to these details, and they got them anyway through the Ouija board. It was the coolest fucking thing I'd seen. It was very much like an impromptu Philip experiment, because this was totally a created thing. Like, there was nothing real about it, and yet the information they got was accurate. Raises all sorts of fun questions about, like, how this stuff works. And a really important takeaway, having talked with Al Peacock with the Philip experiment, was they didn't have a lot of success at first. when they sat down to do their table tipping and other spirit communication with their created spirit Philip, when they were serious about it, when they were just like sitting there trying really hard to be like, we have made this spirit, please talk to us. It was when they all started bullshitting and laughing and making a game out of it that Philip started to interact, that there was energy, that it was a lighter experience. So I think my takeaway, at least, is there is an incredible magic in play and in storytelling. And that's just an amazing power to be able to harness to explore. I've always used the live action games that I ran as a way of vicariously, within a safe and sheltered space, vicariously exploring different emotional states, different experiences, different interactions between people, including occult and metaphysical interactions. We use the games pretty liberally as a way to see what happens if I create an energetically constructed backdrop. Like I build a street and set specific locations. There is a street lamp in this one spot. There is a building that is a storefront in this one spot. I imagine that clearly enough, and I work enough with the energy to create like echoes. I did this at the convention center in Columbus for the game that I ran at Origins in 2000. It was also a game where James Marsters played in our game, and that was a whole other thing. And I didn't do it lightly. Like I had watched this sort of co-created reality happen. Just the profound magic that occurs in these spaces because they are by their nature liminal. It's amazing stuff. But in this case, it was intentional. Street lamp, storefront, color of the awning was green. The street had a little bend to it. And I just watched people play in this spot. Like it had been designated like this corner of the space between the two escalators is near this one building over there. There's a high rise. The only thing that has been established is it's near the high rise that is a plot point. No description of the storefront, no description of the street lamp, none of that stuff. Hearing people talk about all the scenes that they had down there in the like after game sort of post-mortem, there was this moment. One of my regular players was a French teacher. She played with her kids. So she's there talking about this really intense scene she had. And she's like, oh yeah. And then so-and-so fell and just like leaned up against the lamppost. And I watched 3 people stop and go, wait, you saw the lamppost too? And it's just, I'm just quietly like, did it work? Oh my God, it worked. Watching people realize that they had a shared perception of a reality we had co-created. Like I'd painted the backdrop, they had their experiences around it, and that backdrop was on some level perceptible and became part of their experience. Think about what that tells us about hauntings, about reality, about creativity, and about the way that we can just shape the world for one another. It's mind-blowing if you really go deep into the philosophical implications. But as far as play goes, it's just this great shared projector. Like we've got a movie screen and we can just create and paint experiences. I think you see it a little bit if you're a Critical Role fan in those moments that if you've never gamed before, but if you've had a good group, these moments where suddenly everything just aligns. All of the dice rolls suddenly seem improbably perfect for the story. Everybody is suddenly clicking along and they're acting as if they're in the real space, but they're just a bunch of people sitting around a table and they don't look anything like their characters. And yet there is this other elevated reality upon which they are interacting. They have created an astral temple, and it is an astral temple of play. But that doesn't mean it's not potent and magical. And it just, the human capacity, just our imaginations are probably the biggest, most amazing, least explored and understood superpowers that we have. It's also why I come back to games again and again, because they are the best way to exercise those.
So would you say that gaming and like exploring these places in your imagination, what effect does that have on you as a paranormal investigator?
Oh, well, okay. As a paranormal investigator, like, it's interesting because learning how to interact with that other level that is sometimes created by people and their perceptions, and actually always influenced by them. Like, when I go and I do a reading of a location, I'm not looking, I mean, the blindfold is probably a dead giveaway. I'm not looking at the physical location. I'm looking at the echo of that location. But a key thing that I always keep in mind is I'm not only perceiving the echo of the physical house, I'm perceiving a memory of the house. And that memory is in part built by every person who's ever perceived it. That memory is built by people's expectations. Some of the ghosts or some of the effects that I see are almost certainly, and in some cases provably, not what we would think of as an objectively real spirit, but are the imprint projected by someone's fear, someone's dream, someone's belief. One of the hardest places to try to figure out what is real on that side of things is actually Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. They took me into a couple of rooms, one of which it was clear who at least one of the people there had terrible hallucinations. Those hallucinations lingered with an almost palpable reality to my psychic perceptions, to the point where it was impossible to tell if these were ghosts, if these were demons, if these were nightmares, because as far as the space was concerned, they were real regardless. And certainly to the person who'd been in there experiencing them, they were real and they had that weight to them. So as someone who's actively created stuff like that in the context of a game, what that does for me as a paranormal investigator is gives me the mental plasticity to accept this might not be a demon. This might be somebody's idea of what a demon should look like. And then the research comes in afterwards, like what actually happened here? What are people's beliefs? Can we collectively create an experience that nevertheless has a paranormal footprint that even so started off as an urban legend? Slender Man is a real good example of that. I still will, to this day, tell you, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining got into the collective imagination to such a degree that the majority of hauntings people report at hotels specifically almost certainly trace back to that movie, and people interpreting experiences through the lens of the two creepy girls or the little boy going up and down and up and down on his tricycle. I guess what I'm saying is that side of things is a lot more complicated than there are ghosts or there aren't ghosts. Because our minds, we are also the ghosts. We're making the ghosts. We are co-creating some of that perception, our emotions, our expectations. And it really gets into a very sticky spot of like, what is objectively real? And does it matter if it still has a palpable impact? So, and if you're not, look up the Philip experiment and kind of jump off from there, and follow it up by reading Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée and Demonic Reality by Patrick Harper. Those three are a really good trifecta to kind of break your brain out of the idea that it's just dead people, ghosts, and demons, and there's nothing else in between, because oh boy, is there a lot in between. it's truly an undiscovered country. Let's see, when you investigate a place, did you ever experience things that got a big impact on me personally, and how did I break free from that impact? I've told this story before, but it is the single most personally impactful, in a negative way, experience. It was a Paranormal State episode. We were in Mason, Ohio. Uh, there was a woman who had hanged herself in like an external garage, so an unattached garage or work building on their property, about 3 weeks before we showed up. Um, I did not know about that. Things that I also didn't know in the moment was she had originally been the person who reached out to us, repeatedly trying to get us to come investigate. She was desperate for us to investigate. We were very overwhelmed. It was just not a good time to try to like keep up on email while running around the country filming. Her sister then subsequently reached out and finally got us out there, but after she had uh, killed herself from desperation of what she was experiencing there. I'm going in without knowing about any of this. I also, was born and raised in Ohio. And although Mason, Ohio is a little south from where I live, there's a lot of, cultural touchstones in the area. And, there's a different feel when you are investigating something that happened 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Like a lot of people are like, I want to see ghosts that were around. Like, what about ghosts from the 90s or ghosts who died in the 80s? Like, why don't people pick those up? Like, because it doesn't stand out enough. Like, arguably, they look enough like, random Joe just walking through the house. You might be picking up a ghost who died, a couple of years ago. And there's nothing that breaks that reality. Something from 100 to 150 years ago, the clothing looks different, the feel is different, everything's different, but also that gives you, as somebody who's experiencing it, especially as a psychic, a separation. This is someone that I am viewing as opposed to someone I relate to. So, the house, we do the walkthrough. I've got the blindfold on. The house, there's a lot of bad stuff that's happened there, a lot of trauma with children, and it's just yucky. Uh, they lead me out of the house, and I can tell that I'm now outside, and I'm being led down like a uh, little paved path, and I just get this feel that I really don't want to keep going, like just an antipathy of like ick, worse than anything that was in the house. And it's my job. I'm like, I don't really want to go wherever we're going. Uh, and they check in to see if I still want to go. And I'm like, I've just said this. I want you to know I have a bad feeling about whatever you're face planting me into. Like this feels pretty heavy. You will never see the actual reading I did in that building, because that was the first time we learned that you can actually be so psychic that you break people's privacy rules. They had to pull me off the investigation because what I picked up on was so personal for the people involved, that the production company was afraid that we would get sued. The One of the family members heard enough of what I picked up on that she wanted to kick us, just all of us, out, and the compromise was to just remove me. They brought in Lorraine Warren instead. So I got sidelined, but I've got this whole experience in my head of what this woman went through, what led her to make the decision that she did. And she was around my age. So we had very similar cultural touchstones. Our emotional language, like where we grew up, like we had some differences, but we had many more things in common than we had differences. And getting her memories back out of my head took weeks. And again, you didn't usually see it on camera, but Paranormal State, we had a psychologist on call. Occasionally you saw him in episodes, but I actually ended up talking to him because in subsequent readings for, I would say, the next 4 episodes that I got called in on, the minute I put the blindfold on and closed my eyes, I just flashed back to that experience. Just I already have PTSD, but this actually gave me PTSD that I had to I had trauma from it and had to like find a way to steer my brain away from it. But there was um, the night immediately after doing that reading, I woke up in my hotel room disoriented, stuck in her emotions. And I went on to the place that was at that time still called Twitter, and was much more like a bunch of friends hanging out. And I'm just like, hey, I need anybody out there, just occupy me, distract me, do something. So actually, you could probably still dig into like my really, really, really old Twitter from back then, because that's like 2008, 2009. And me and Auntie Trist, she has since passed. She was a big supporter and fan and friend from the Paranormal State fandom. Auntie Trist happened to be up, and I couldn't talk about like what the thing was, like, NDA and all that, but I could say like, I am having a hard time. Like, there's all these emotions. They are not mine. I just need a distraction. And she helped me get through it. But it sucked. I do not like it. I worked through it, but that was the most personally impactful. I don't recommend it.
Is that part of why you built in such strong like safety into this game?
Well, the safety into the game, safety into everything else. Like, role-playing games have come a very long way since when I was, first playing them. The thing about role-playing games is it is psychodrama. And role-playing is a significant tool in therapy. And it can do a lot of like really powerful psychological things. And to some extent, you can be playing with fire if you do role playing without some boundaries, because emotional spillage can happen. And in some cases, it's a desirable thing to happen. Like, it's not uncommon if you're like deep into role play to just bawl your eyes out with your character, to feel vicariously all of the emotions and to have this sort of bleed where for some time you are them, you're experiencing what they're experiencing. And that is part of the lore. Like, you want to be able to just have this experience within the safe context of this space, but adding the safety tools makes it a little safer, so that if you are losing yourself, if you are super distressed, if someone else has a different set of boundaries than you do and it just keeps pushing, you have a framework where you can say no, where you can clearly get everybody to stop, where it is understood that it's okay to just end the scene if somebody is now over the ledge, as opposed to having an experience that is intense but desirable. Those safety tools are also there because back when I was running the LARPs, the in-person games, uh, if you've ever been in a live-action role-playing game, you know at least one guy who would use the game as a way of picking up ladies and hitting on them in his character, and usually would use "I'm just role-playing" as a way of basically sexually assaulting people, like physically just holding people up against the wall. I intervened in so many of these, especially at the big conventions, that it just became something that you learned to look out for. And adding safety tools to the role playing experience is also acknowledging that there are people who will abuse the emotional situation, the role play situation, and making sure that there are clear lines of stop this shit or get the fuck out. From Kill. Both gaming and investigations are driven by curiosity. Like, what will happen if I test out some new things? Yes, I love it though. Like, it's my favorite thing. Like, let's play with everything. Um, for me, gaming, especially like live action gaming, is this opportunity to create a what if scenario, and sort of test it out, like experiment. Like, if this emotional situation is real, then what does that feel like? The Origins 1995 game, one of the things that I did homebrew rules for drugs in the game. Uh, Understand, in the 90s, it was a hard sell to a lot of places when we were like trying to get to run our game at a hotel, to rent the hotel as 20 somethings who were like doing a weird role play game with vampires during the height of the Satanic Panic. They wanted nothing to do with a bunch of goths, no matter whether or not our money was green. They were sure we were going to do something like weird and skeevy in there. All we wanted to do was dress up and play. Not an issue these days. Back then, the sell was, this is a way of experiencing vicariously different social circumstances and situations. And I homebrewed the drugs to have an anti-drug message, which was a really good sell on paper to the hotels and other places that we were doing things in. But it also let people play with like the cost of addiction and like what kind of weird economies grow out of circumstances like that. That's just one example of things that like you got to play with in a safe environment because it's all conceptual. Games and game design and LARPing is also incredibly useful in a number of other places. Christopher Robichaux, I believe Dr. Christopher Robichaux now, is one of my gaming buddies from high school, and you can see him run some very interesting ethical LARPs through Harvard. He has made a career out of designing LARPs off of the same gaming stuff that we were doing around the table when we were playing D&D and Spelljammer at John Carroll, and applying that to creating thought problems that feel real and allow us to have, within a safe environment, really intense conversations about, all right, so, global thermonuclear war, what do we do? Anything like that. Sounds like I have to find shows to watch. The name of the group again you are a part of. Actually, that's complicated because there's if you're talking about shows, the one that I would send you to that is the easiest to look at right now on YouTube, Travel the Dead, and it is Katrina Weidman. Weid Man is how you spell her last name. And look for that YouTube. She's liked on my YouTube, so if you can find my YouTube, you can find her YouTube. But honestly, just Google Travel the Dead, and you will see her stuff. It is indie produced, high quality. There's a whole story behind why, but it really comes down to Travel Channel didn't want a woman-run show, so just did it ourselves. But you can also find old episodes of Paranormal State, Portals to Hell. I did a couple of things on Fright Club, Paranormal Lockdown. I think that there's a couple of episodes of Resident Undead on YouTube that you can find me. I'm sort of all over the place. But the most recent, and honestly, I think the most like immersively portrayed, is the work with Travel the Dead, because Katrina doesn't shy away from showing the behind the scenes stuff, both what lines up and also the process. So if you really want to kind of dig into like what that really looks like, what that really feels like without the flash and kind of pandering to like quick and punchy and flashy, Travel the Dead is the one to look for. Oh, do you guys still have the cabin you bought and fixed up? So we had a feel to pass it along to another caretaker. What was it, last year? And so there was someone local who, one, knew about the haunting, was totally okay with the haunting, had been kind of yearning for the house. And we had made ourselves a promise that the only way we would pass it along is if someone, one, fully understood what they were getting themselves into, loved the house as much as we did, and the house itself approved, because my goodness, it had a personality. And yeah, we passed it along to someone else. It is a private residence now. She wasn't very keen on having people troop through the house, and everything seems quite happy. And for us, it was important to just, there was so much going on in the world, it became really a lot to try to juggle, and I felt I was no longer doing the house justice.
Cool.
Huh.
How many like How much more question answer time do you feel up for? That's my question.
I'm good with taking like one or two more questions. Because of that news I got just before we started, I've seen a couple of texts come through from friends who I let know about. We
Community.
So somebody in a wider community passed, and I was just passing that information along. It was just bad timing for when it came through.
I think I would ask one question, which is if you had to say one thing that you think people would find in Soul to Keep that's either unique or that you really think is like a really neat feature of the game.
Oh, what is a really neat feature in Soul to Keep, or something that is a standout? I mean, I would say my first and foremost thing is reframing possession away from it's always a demon. Because that's not how I have experienced it in a lot of the places that we've investigated. Like again, this isn't how it showed up on the television show, because television shows, like production companies, have a certain idea of the way things need to go. But there was a Paranormal State investigation where the family thought their kid was possessed, and talking with the kid and talking with the mom, what was coming through was a past life. And actually, the child remembered enough, and none of this makes it to the episode. The child remembered and spoke repeatedly of having a sister, of being a young boy, of being in the back of an SUV, like a minivan, of living in Florida. Like, it was possible to find the wreck they died in before they were born. They had that much information. And the distressing thing was, the child now was a girl, the past life was a boy, and there was just not a whole lot of split between the previous personality and the current personality. And in the location of the country where they found themselves, and the very strongly Christian household they found themselves in, the family found this bleed over very distressing. But it wasn't a demon. It was just, I mean, actually classic kind of past life bleed over from a previous personality, the likes of which you would see in any Dr. Ian Stevenson book. So yeah, I want people to rethink possession and rethink interactions with spirits, and just sort of play with, like, what does that mean? I guess really, like, just consider the humanity of the things that we're interacting with, even when they seem terrifying and needy or destructive. Because in most cases, those emotions are coming from a place of trauma.
We've managed to go through almost all the questions in
Okay.
the chat that are remotely connected to the topic.
I know. Oh yeah, because everybody's going to be like, when are you going to be on TV? And are you going to do a thing? Do you do psychic readings? No, not for hire. There's a whole lot of reasons for that, but the long and the short of it is just no. I always prefer to teach people how to do stuff for themselves. Like my biggest value is literally, like, give a man a fish or teach a man to fish. I don't want to read for you. I want to teach you to read for yourself.
Well, and there's the tarot class series that you just wrapped up where you do exactly that.
Well, that's what the classes are for. Like, I teach classes on psychic development. I teach classes on tarot. If you follow me on Patreon, you have access to those as they come out. If you don't follow me on Patreon, you just go move over to my website. There is a ridiculous number of classes. If you want to learn psychic self-defense, if you want to learn psychic development, if you want to do stuff on energy work and energy healing, if you want to dig into secret occult history, that is the topic for this year. Last year I loved the tarot classes enough as like a themed thing every single month that I decided to carry the theme forward this year. And this year's theme is actually based off of the very first professional class I ran was at Case Western Reserve University in 1996, and it was occult history. It was lovingly the class that would have guaranteed I would never get tenure as a college professor, because I dish all the dirt about people you hear about. W.B. Yeats, William Blake, General Patton, and the secret occult, paranormal, and psychic experiences and beliefs and practices that were a significant part of their lives, that influenced things throughout their lives. Patton, my favorite thing with Patton, he believed in past lives. It was a huge part of his personality, to the point where the man in college invented a way of fencing. Foils were way too just for him. He invented a fencing style for broadswords, because that was what a past life version of him related to better.
Okay, we've got a pair of questions.
Okay.
From Karen.
All right.
Question 1.
Are all demons Christian?
Followed by,
and if you don't follow Christianity and don't believe, are demons real? I will say all of the widely portrayed ideas of what a demon is, especially what you see in books and movies, are Christianized. The idea of a demonic spirit it predates Christianity. And you will see demonic entities in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, actually all the Asian things. I work with a Buddhist monk, and we're just talking about different exorcism techniques from that perspective. The idea of a non-human entity that is a spirit that is malevolent and destructive is something that you will see around the world. The idea that it is somehow from hell and out to devour your soul, that's pretty Christian. And in some respects, that's very Christian from a Miltonian Paradise Lost sort of way. Like we've created almost a biblical fan fiction over the years that present and interpret and give a shape to these things that you don't really even see in the Bible. Biblical demons have a lot more in common with the demonic entities that bled into Judaism from the ancient Near East, especially from Sumer and Babylon. So Christian belief is not necessary to allow for the possibility of something that is demonic, but the way in which we frame a demon these days is very colored through Christian lenses. And the idea of demons as an intrinsic part of damnation and redemption, heaven and hell, the war in heaven, fallen angels, yada, 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 Satan, Lucifer, any of them, that is very much a part of a Christianized worldview, but the core is much deeper and older. Some of the elements that I find interesting is some of the most ancient demonic entities that come down to us that will sometimes pop up in things like Pazuzu, who is in the Exorcist movies. Pazuzu was a kind of king of demons, lord of demons, who was not only kind of a demonic entity themselves, but they were called upon to control or drive off demons. An ancient idea about demonic or evil spirits that does not translate into a Christianized worldview was that things that caused disease or disaster or calamity not only could bring it about, like it was their nature to control that. So you would have a demon of disease. My favorite one is literally a demon of tetanus. Like that is the only thing he's in charge of. He causes tetanus, but he's also the guy that you pray to or make a sacrifice to. And I'm not talking goats, I'm talking an offering, if you want to be protected from tetanus. Which also gets into the fact that a lot of ancient ideas of what a demon is was just a name for a disease or something else problematic in the world that we couldn't control. So they were personified. And the line between magic and medicine and religion, ritual, exorcism, and medical treatment, dialed all the way back, especially in pre-Christian times, is very, very wibbly. It's worth digging into that stuff. if you can find them, the Maklu texts from Babylonian tradition, the burning texts, they are kind of the core of, honestly, Western exorcism, and you will see echoes of them all the way down into Christian ideas of what demons are, what demons do, and what you have to do to get rid of them. Echoes of them in like the Gerasene demoniac in Mark and other biblical stories. So, short version, don't have to be Christian to accept that maybe demons are real. Demons don't have to be demons from a Christian perspective. Christians got their demons from the Jews. Jews got their demons from the Sumerians and the Babylonians, and they probably got them from people who were before them.
Do you have the bandwidth for one more question?
One more question, yes.
There we go.
Do you believe you can get rid of a human spirit that has passed, or do you believe they have free will? Oh, that's a really good question. I believe that they have free will. And I believe that you can get rid of them, but I believe that you should not do so against their will. The most effective way, I do not believe in just opening a gate to wherever and just sending things into the light. I think that's incredibly presumptuous on a couple of levels. One, do they want to go in the light? Did you ask them? Two, what gives you the right? Like, do you really have the ability to just yeet things into another existence? Like, come on, really? But that said, if we accept that spirits exist, if we accept that some of those spirits are humans who have not passed beyond this space, even though they've left their body behind, some of them are here by choice. Some of them are here because they have unresolved issues, attachments, trauma. The ones that don't really want to be here, that are troubled, rather than just opening a door and kicking them, whether they want to go or not, if you have the capacity to communicate, talk with them, reassure them, what they need is a good therapist. Like, literally, they just need someone to talk to in most cases. The most effective thing you can do to help a spirit like that move on is if you have the empathy and the capacity to communicate with them, even if you can't hear them yourself. You know that they're in that space. Talk to them. Talk about what you know about their life. Give them permission to let go. If it's a family member, especially, and you think that they're staying just because they feel bad about something, tell them you forgive them. Or if you don't forgive them, tell them why. Have a conversation. If you feel really weird about having that conversation out loud, write it as a letter, and then do something to pass that letter to the other side. Whether you bury it, you put it in their grave, literally burn it, something to release it to them, to pass that communication along. But yeah, I really, really, really have a lot of profound ethical concerns and objections to the idea of just walking into a space and being like, into the light, into the light. It's, one, I find it ridiculous and actually insulting, and completely against the idea that these are beings with reality and free will. It's a facile approach to spirits. If you accept that there are some spirits that are human beings, they were human beings, they have not left their humanity behind, treat them like humans, with all of the rights and awkwardness and free will that goes with that, and get their permission.
You know, one thing I hadn't thought of is, what if the investigator in Keep was one of those who's like, I'm going to send this little ghostie into the light? I think that would be a really interesting way to play.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really interesting way to get in over your head sometimes too.
Yes, it would be. Oh my gosh. Okay. Any last plea? Any reminder? Keep?
Go over to, as much as it's fun to talk about ghosts from the paranormal thing, like, again, like, I like to play with it, go over to the Kickstarter, take a look at it. I kind of bare my soul with this one. It is a big ask. It is all or nothing. And if you can help boost us up, that would be great. There are 21 days to go. I think we're about 20% funded right now. If we can get over the amount, there are stretch goals, and those allow me to bring in diverse voices, some really cool people. Uh, I, at some point, maybe a few more days in, we will give a teaser of like who some of those faces and names and voices will be. They are sort of like sitting in the sidelines. They know that they won't be called upon unless we get to a certain funding goal. But what they will do is create sample characters. So from their imaginations, from their perspectives, give us their version of like what does the ghost character look like written by this person? What does the investigator look like written by this person? And would you like to play those? You get to have those added into your experience and into the game.
All right.
One more thing though. Money's tight. Everything's uncertain. The world kind of sucks right now. If putting $10 toward this is going to take money out of your mouth, if that breaks the bank for you, I don't want it. Please. If you are somebody like me where you've got a certain amount of spending money that you can just be like, hey, I like that, please, I would love you to help support it. But I do not want to be building this off of someone else's misery. Take care of yourself first. Times are very uncertain. If it all comes down to it and we don't fund, I'll feel bad, but at the end of the day, that's just how you do this. It is all or nothing. And I'd really rather everybody be as safe as possible in times that are as uncertain as they are right now. There's a certain level of unreality in the fact that, like, I was planning to do this all last year, and it seems like we're just trying to fund this sort of like fun little frivolous thing while the world is literally burning. And at the same time, I'm also aware that making art and doing things that are fun and lighthearted is a way to deal with what's going on in the world. But again, if it hurts you, I don't want your money. Only if it's something that you can spare. Please and thank you.
All right. With that.
And with that, ta-ta.